This afternoon, we have three more presentations to go, three more objects that, as Leah and I say, picked their person out of the hat as much as they picked the object out of the hat. And our first talk this session will be Abigail Coomes. Abigail comes to us from Middle Tennessee State University, where she's a PhD candidate in historic preservation, but she has a new job as well. She is now the collections manager and site coordinator for Travelers Rest, incredible site outside of Nashville. If you haven't been there, you need to visit, and you now know somebody who can get you in. It really is a great site. Her talk today will be to save many a poor fellow, Iron Downspouts, Charles Coontz, and the Fall of a Man.
Before we start, I would like to thank everybody for attending our presentations today, here and on virtually. Today, I will be talking about a man and the choices he made throughout his life led to financial ruin from which he never recovered. The story of Charles Coontz unfolds in the city of Winchester, Virginia, centered on a downspout that resides in the Mesda collection. The catalyst of his story, though, starts with a fire that took place in 1862. During the Civil War, Winchester was home to a group of women known as the Devil's Diarist. This group of 4 women kept journals, 3 supported the Confederacy, and 1 supported the Union. Among the best known is Mary Greenhow Lee, who was exiled from the city by one of the Union generals later on. On Tuesday morning, May 27, 1862, Mary wrote about the raging Battle of Winchester that took place that weekend. Mary saw the battle enter the town itself, writing, quote, "Suddenly there was a cry of fire, and we saw the flames bursting out of the roof of Coontz's commissary building. And everybody thought it was the beginning of the execution of the threat the Yankees had made to burn the town before they left." Mary recounts how the fire set 5 city blocks ablaze. Mary Greenhow Lee was able to sit on her front porch and observe everything that happened in the city. She lived on Cameron and Piccadilly Street, represented here by the blue circle, just down from Coontz's foundry, located on Cameron and Fairfax Lane, which is represented by the red circle. The loss of the foundry is important because this is the location where the Mesda downspout was made. I found the floor plan for Coontz's foundry in his military records. These military records were a treasure trove of information that helped me understand Coontz and his foundry. Charles Coontz was known for making agricultural implements and castings like this downspout. He chose to cast symbols, his name, and the year it was made onto the front. By looking at the foundry, we can see the spaces that the downspout would have occupied when it was made in 1856. The downspout was created using a sand core produced at the foundry. It allowed the downspout to have a hollow center. They were placed in the mold, and then the molten iron was poured inside. Once it cooled, the downspout moved to the finishing shop. Once there, its rough edges were filed down. Once refined, it traveled to the warehouse to be sold. The downspout's function was to protect a building by directing the water away from the foundation. Charles W. Coontz's downspout from Mesda's collection is about 6 feet long and is L-shaped. The downspout has 4 wings, 2 near the top and 2 near the bottom, with rounded edges with oval-shaped holes in the center. These were likely used to attach the downspout to the exterior of a building. The top has a molded column-style decoration similar to Doric columns. Underneath that, a double C is directly below. And underneath that is a cast line that goes around 3 sides of the downspout. In the center of the downspout, there is a cast arrow with markings resembling dental work at the bottom. Inside the arrow is his name, Charles W. Coontz. Directly below is 1856, and underneath the 1856 is another cast arrow. The downspout is hollow inside to allow water to pass through it. The L shape enables water to flow away from the structure it was attached to. There are also holes present on the backside indicating wear. The iron that Charles Coontz used likely came from either Frederick, Clark, or Shenandoah County, which had limonite deposits. Coontz, maybe in addition to processing his own iron ore, could have purchased pig iron from nearby furnaces, like Tredegar Iron Works, which was located in Richmond, which at the time was one of the largest iron producers in the state. The process of making iron also requires limestone as a flux and wood used as the fuel source. Coontz likely got the wood and limestone from other merchants in the Winchester area. To understand the importance of the downspout, we need to understand who Charles Coontz was. Charles Coontz was born in Winchester in 1827 to Peter and Mary Shugart Coontz. His father, Peter, was a carpenter and taught the trade to Charles's older brothers, William and George. Peter was a skilled carpenter and did some work for the Wood family, who lived in Glen Burnie in 1810. The Wood family hired out several enslaved individuals for 2 days to Peter Coontz in 1811 for $40. At the time, the census only shows that Peter enslaved one individual. By 1840, a few years before Peter's death, the census shows that he enslaved at least 7 individuals. In 1844, Peter died, and he left various things to his children in his will. Charles was around 17 at the time, and in his will, Peter states, quote, "In the case of my son, Charles Washington, should learn the carpentry and joinery trade. I wish my sons, William Coontz and George Coontz, to give him a set of carpentry tools," end quote. Charles does become a carpenter, and he is living with his brothers, William and George, in 1850. In 1852, Charles took the skills that he learned as a carpenter and opened up a foundry on the corner of Cameron, also commonly referred to as Market Street, and Fairfax Lane. Many of the skills that he learned as a carpenter would have transferred to the foundry as he added elements to his molds and produced agricultural implements. Charles was defying the wishes of his father by leaving behind the carpentry trade and pivoting to a career as a foundryman. The lot he purchased consisted of a foundry, boilers, a core oven, a finishing shop, a house, a warehouse, and a smokehouse. All of these spaces were connected to one another, as you can see in the floor plan that was found in Charles Coontz's Civil War records. Coontz had at least 2 apprentices working for him. The first was Charles Alcott, who was about 20 years old and worked for Coontz. According to the Alexandria Gazette, Charles was the son of George Alcott and was on his way to the Shenandoah River when he was injured in an accident involving his horse and wagon in 1857. The second apprentice that we know about is William Alcott, Charles's younger brother, and was listed as an apprentice foundryman living with Charles Coontz and his family at the foundry site in 1860. Charles Coontz was successful and had faith in the products he produced at his foundry. He listed threshing machines and steam engines for sale through the Rockingham Register. Coontz includes 2 references for customers to contact regarding the advertised products. Coontz also thought highly of his products that he decided to put his name on everything. Coontz and William Alcott were not the only ones, though, working at the foundry. He would have needed a large workforce, as his foundry was recorded in 1860 on the non-population industry census as producing 170 plows, 20 wheat drills, 11 threshing machines, and around 7,000 castings. The same census states that there were at least 25 men working at the foundry for Charles Coontz. So far, none of the records indicate that Coontz enslaved any individuals, but it is likely that he hired out enslaved labor from other enslavers in the area. We know his father Peter rented out enslaved labor from the Wood family. Charles could have done the same as his father, since the two families already had a working relationship. Coontz could have also hired out enslaved labor from numerous other plantations around the Winchester area. The iron industry has a long history of relying on enslaved labor in every aspect of the trade. To truly understand the extent to which enslaved labor was used, you must really look at the other industries that supplied the raw materials for the foundry, such as iron ore mining, timber harvesting, and limestone mining, like the images you saw previously of the raw materials. Without the knowledge and labor of the enslaved people, these mass-produced goods like Charles Coontz's downspout would not be readily available. I know that the Mazda downspout was cast sometime in 1856. By the late 18th century, rainwater management switched from lead to cast iron as it started to be mass-produced. In the 19th century, cast iron gutters and downspouts were common due to mass production alongside copper and tin. The earliest we know Coontz started casting downspouts was in 1856. We know at least one other casting of downspouts was done in 1860 and was installed on a building in Roost Street in Winchester, known as Lawyers Row. Coontz could have chosen his molds based on the demands of his city and the smaller towns around Winchester. According to a concerned citizen in Alexandria, they said that the cast iron gutters, quote, would look neat and would be durable, and by no means be costly, and save many a poor fellow from falling into the present deep brick gutters, end quote. In 1859, repairs were also taking place on King Street in Alexandria, and the Alexandria Gazette stated that they were installing cast iron gutters on the streets as repairs were taking place. For Charles, the foundry business was successful, and he was still casting in 1860. However, this changes in 1861. The first battle of the Civil War took place in 1861 at Fort Sumter. Quickly, people started to choose sides: brother versus brother, friend versus friend. The question Coontz and his neighbors asked themselves was whether they would support their state or their country. Coontz chose to align himself with his state via the Confederate Army. In 1861, he is recommended an appointment by General J.E. Johnston as the acting commissary for the post of Winchester. The city of Winchester had 3 battles, with the first happening in 1862. The first Battle of Winchester sets off in a chain of events that leads to a major life event for Coontz and his family. The burning of the foundry and his house is a direct outcome of the first Battle of Winchester and Coontz's association with the Confederacy. Coontz was likely running the commissary out of his foundry and continued to cast items to supply for the Confederacy. These next 2 slides contain just a small sample of Captain Coontz's military records. These records included his appointment and several receipts from when he ordered supplies for the troops. Common items that he ordered were kettles, rice, bacon, coffee, skillets, and boilers. Other documents included a list of who he purchased goods from, when he was being paid, or time kept for renting out a team of horses. In 1862 was a major loss for the Coontz family. Charles lost a major source of income and all of his family's belongings. Luckily, he still owned the stone house on South Loudon Street that belonged to his father, Peter. After the foundry burns, his wife, Louisa, and his 3 children, Walter, Emma, and Esther, move into this house. After the Civil War, Charles Coontz lost everything. His foundry and home were burned to the ground for his connections to the Confederacy, and he was even forced to sell his father's home in 1865 to recoup some of his financial losses. So bear with me for a little bit as I go over these next 4 images. Unfortunately, the microfilm scans for this letter are not the best quality, but these 4 pages describe in detail the account of the fire at the foundry from Charles Coontz's perspective. I found this letter along with the floor plan in Coontz's military records. Finding these records was a major breakthrough for my research, as previously no one knew that they existed. I could not find a date on this document, however, but in his letter, Charles is describing the fire and what was lost in the foundry and in his home. Coontz had a substantial amount of money in the foundry, along with his family's personal belongings. He describes some of the products that were in the foundry, but states that he will be sending a detailed list of all the items lost in the fire, in the foundry and in his home at a later date. That statement shows that Coontz is trying to get some form of compensation for everything he lost in the fire. It was not just Charles, though, who lost things in the fire. His wife and children lost what little they owned and any sentimental objects that were inside their home. Trying to recover financially, Charles returns to carpentry and opens up a lumber yard. He moves onto the property in Winchester with his family and his older brother George, who also served along Charles in the Confederate Army. According to the census record in 1870, both George and Charles are listed as carpenters. A year into opening the lumber yard, however, Charles is declared bankrupt by the state of Virginia. By aligning himself with the Confederate Army, Charles has now made himself a poor fellow. He is struggling to recoup the status and wealth he had before the Civil War. In fact, he cannot even afford or even think about opening up another foundry due to the lack of finances. After Charles is declared bankrupt, he ends up living on a farm in Clark County near the town of Berryville. He is living with his youngest daughter, Esther. There are also a woman named Johanna Hart and her daughters that are boarders at his house. Charles is still living on this farm in 1900 with two of his grandchildren, one housekeeper and one farm laborer. Around 1903, Charles moved to Hagerstown, Maryland to live with his daughter Emma and her family. In 1907, Charles Coontz died and was buried in Mount Hebron Cemetery in Winchester, Virginia. During the study trip, I was able to visit Mount Hebron Cemetery and visit Charles and Louisa Coontz's headstones, reminding me of the man behind the object. The Mazda downspout dates to 1859 and contains the name of its maker. Charles Coontz likely put his name on his products as a way to advertise his foundry. Doing this was a common practice. People would see these products and instantly identify who the maker was. For Charles Coontz, adding his name was a way to bring more business to his foundry. Also, the provenance for this piece was that it was purchased from a farm sale by Mark Hall Antiques outside of Berryville, and then later purchased by Mazda. Now, one descendant still living in Winchester found another 1856 downspout, identical to the one in the Mazda collection. This downspout was previously attached to a wagon company storefront in Winchester, which you can see depicted on the screen right next to where the little girl is standing. For them, purchasing this downspout was a way to connect with their family history. Although they did not know much about Charles, they knew that this piece was an important part of their family history. These downspouts show that sometimes an object can be tangible connection to family history when they do not know or possess of any historical documents. In this case, the family did not know that Charles Coontz's military records existed, and the downspout was a tangible reminder of their ancestor. These two downspouts show how Charles Coontz had a successful foundry. However, due to his loyalties during the Civil War, Coontz was never able to regain his pre-Civil War wealth and became a poor fellow. His success as a foundryman fell apart because of the war, just like the water that fell through his downspout. I would just like to thank everybody that helped me, especially the Mills Lane Architectural Fellowship for supporting my time here at the Summer Institute, as long as with the Mazda staff and everybody who helped me and the fellows for supporting me through this time. Thank you.